The champagne spilled out of the glass at the very moment Marcia Blake collapsed onto the polished marble of my floor. Foam gathered at the corners of her mouth, her body twitched convulsively, and my ears rang with panic and unfamiliar voices. And all I could think was, damn, that glass was meant for me. My name is Vivian Carter, I'm 70, and I just sold my consulting company for $23 million. I am a widow, I raised my son alone, and I am used to keeping everything under control. My son Nathan threw a party to celebrate, and his wife Avery suddenly decided to become the perfect hostess. Too perfect. If you've ever suspected that someone close to you is playing a dangerous game with you, you're not alone. Write in the comments if you've ever had to hide your suspicions for safety's sake. Subscribe. It's only going to get more intense. Marcia collapsed like a doll with severed strings, right in the middle of my shiny floor. I flinched at the sound of broken glass, my eyes stinging. It was the all-too-familiar glass with a tiny chip on the rim that I always chose for myself. It lay by her hand, wet with spilled champagne and something else, sticky and slightly viscous. "Mom!" Sloane gasped, rushing to Marcia. "Someone call an ambulance." My heart was pounding in my chest like a hammer. I mechanically sank down beside her, feeling my dress pulling at my knees and my knees shaking. Foam at her mouth, a hazy gaze, short, ragged breaths. Someone handed her a blanket, someone grabbed a phone. It all seemed like slow motion, with only one thought ringing clearly like a gong. "Maybe she's allergic," one of the guests asked nervously. "Or her heart, she's almost 70, added a neighbor. But I already knew it wasn't her heart. I was standing closest to her, and saw Sloane fussing over the champagne table 10 minutes earlier. I saw her discreetly pull a tiny bottle out of her clutch. I didn't scream. I didn't grab it out of her hands. I just watched. I let her hand me a glass. I smiled. I thanked her. And then I replaced it. Marcia was standing nearby, looking away when I put my glass down next to her bag. It all happened quietly, quickly, and so easily that it was almost offensive. And at the moment when her fingers trembled and her eyes rolled out of their sockets, I realized one thing. This poison was not meant for her. The first thing that alarmed me was that the house smelled of vanilla and lavender. The scents were unfamiliar. Not mine. I always preferred lemon and clean cotton, but Sloane had placed scented candles in every room. The kitchen sparkled as if someone had scrubbed it with a toothbrush, and the table was set as if it belonged in a wedding catalog. "Surprise," she said, adjusting the gray ribbon on the napkin. "Everything has to be perfect, Vi." My brain registered dryness on my tongue, and a strange tension in my shoulders. Sloane, the same Sloane who usually forgot to defrost the chicken, was now arranging canapes with tweezers. The flowers on the table, roses and orchids, were chosen to match the colors of my old logo. It was a small thing, but someone had paid attention. Too much attention. "Where's Nathan?" I asked, fastening my bracelet. "He went out to meet the guests. He wanted you to just relax." She smiled and leaned over the glasses. Her nails, dark cherry with a matte finish, scratched the glass as she lined up the glasses. I suddenly felt cold, despite the summer outside the windows. The glasses stood in a perfect row, and only one stood out, with a tiny crack on the rim. Mine. I always used it out of habit. Old glass, memory, superstition. "I'll open the champagne right before the toast," Sloane added and winked. "Everything's under control." I nodded and went out onto the porch to greet the first guests. My face broke into a smile, but inside I felt a dull ache. It's a shame I didn't notice right away how hard she was trying. I noticed the substitution precisely because no one else would have noticed it. That very glass, my glass, stood a little closer to the edge, a little to the right of the others, with a barely noticeable chip at the base. I recognized it like you recognize an old mole in the mirror, with a slight pang of anxiety. Only now there was a drop on the glass, cloudy like undisturbed syrup. "Mom, are you okay?" Nathan appeared behind me and touched my back. "You suddenly seemed frozen." "Everything's fine," I said and forced a smile. My neck ached from the strained expression, and the air between my shoulder blades seemed to thicken. Sloane stood a meter away, clutching her bag. She looked perfect. Her hair in a bun, a floor-length dress, lips the color of old cherries. But her fingers trembled as she took a tiny bottle out of her bag, with a screw cap like body oil. I just add a couple of drops of liqueur to it, she said, noticing my gaze. To your favorite glass. To give it a special taste. How sweet, I nodded. We looked at each other, and something invisible flashed between us, like a chess move made without a piece. Everything inside me froze. I wasn't sure what she had poured, but I knew for sure it wasn't for the taste. And I had lived too long in a world where gifts sometimes meant attack. Vi, your hands are cold, Sloane whispered, handing me the glass. Are you sure you want to drink? I took the glass. I thanked her. I waited, and then I just changed it. The sound of her body hitting the floor was too loud for such a fragile woman. The guests froze mid-sentence, flushed from champagne and compliments. Someone screamed. The man by the fireplace dropped his glass, and it shattered in unison with the one already lying next to Marcia's hand. My ex, now hers. Is she breathing? Whispered my neighbor, leaning over as if afraid to breathe in the poison with her. Marcia's lips were gray, her chin twitched, and thin foam baked in the corners of her mouth. Her fingers slowly curled as if she were trying to grab the air like a sheet in her sleep. People crowded around, creating noise and panic, but in my mind there was silence. In that silence, I looked at only one face. Sloane. She stood slightly apart, her hand pressed to her chest, like a scene from a Broadway play. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes rounded but too dry, too controlled. Has anyone called an ambulance? Nathan said loudly, already stung by fear, but not panic. He leaned over his wife and whispered something, too quickly for ordinary comfort. I don't know how it happened. Sloane's voice trembled. She was just drinking champagne. And I knelt down next to Marcia, placing 2 fingers on her wrist. There was a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. And while everyone around me was rushing about, I continued to watch, watching for trembling hands, watching for glances, watching for whoever was closest to the bottle. Sloane gradually moved away from the body, and with each step, the mask of sympathy slipped from her face. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and something metallic, as if the pain itself hung in the air. I sat on a plastic chair that was too narrow for my back, too slippery for my thoughts. Nathan paced the hallway, staring at his phone screen. Sloane sat with her fingers interlocked, staring at a single point as if rehearsing. Except that real fear doesn't come with makeup without a single smudged line. Her condition is unstable. We gave her atropine and are now connecting her to N4, said the doctor in a white coat as he walked past us. The cause? Asked the nurse. Looks like plant-based alkaloids. Rare, but it happens. Poisonous. Not food poisoning. My heart clenched like a fist that had been accidentally stabbed with a pin. Alkaloids. Not something you'd find on the vitamin shelf. Someone had taken the time. Someone had tried very hard. That's terrible, Sloane said quietly, and I caught a tremor in her voice. Poor Mom. I just don't understand where this could have come from. Maybe she ate something before the party? Nathan suggested. Or her pills. She often forgets. She doesn't forget. Ever. Marcia's pill box is labeled and numbered by day and hour. She has an alarm on her phone with a voice reminder, mine by the way, to take her pills. It's funny how enemies always hope you'll forget that you can remember too. The main thing is that she woke up, Sloane added, reaching for her coffee. I watched her hand tremble, her shoulders tense, sweat glisten on her cheek. Not from the heat, from anticipation. Only my old bones knew. She was hoping it was me. Mom, maybe you should stay with us for now, he said without looking up from his cup. His voice was soft, almost fearful, as if this suggestion should sound affectionate rather than like a sentence. We were sitting in the kitchen the next morning. The coffee was getting cold, and the rolls no longer smelled fresh. Nathan had brought them from my favorite bakery. A gesture of kindness wrapped in overly thin packaging. After what happened to Marcia, we're just worried, he looked up. Those eyes used to be warm. Now they were troubled, too calm, too rehearsed. I installed a new security system, remember? I reminded him. Everything is connected. Everything works. That's not it, Mom. It's not about the alarm. You're alone in a big house after a party like that. Sloane came over and sat down next to me. We just want you to be safe. Just for a little while. Until things calm down. The smile on her face was warm, but her fingers were fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. I watched them. The folds were too even, not a single corner out of symmetry. "We can take you to our place tonight," Nathan added. "You'll have your own room, a view of the garden, even a jacuzzi tub, a cage, velvet, warm, with a hydromassage function. Are you sure it's because of Marcia and not because of me?" I asked, looking Sloane straight in the eye. She froze. For a second. No more. But that second was louder than any yes. Too caring to be true. The checkbook lay on the table like an old notebook with dried-up signatures. I took it out of the drawer with my personal papers. No one had looked in there for a long time, not even me. Next to it was a yellow notebook with bookmarks and several printouts from the account. Everything was neatly arranged in columns. Gifts, help, support, beautiful words for money that never comes back. "Mom, you know we'll pay it back just right now," Nathan said a few years ago, the year they bought the house. "We're not asking for much, just a little backup," Sloane added. Back then, she still knew how to make her eyes water on command. I ran my finger over the line. $20,000 down payment May 5th. My handwriting rounded, confident. Someone else's. Next, daycare payments, the bill for unexpected expenses in March, then school, then Lily's dental treatment, and the jewelry exhibition that Sloane was investing in for the sake of her dream. All of these dreams were at my expense. The coffee had gone cold. My hand ached from writing for so long. I wrote everything down by hand. Felt more reliable that way. The calculator was silent, but the numbers kept growing. $5,000, $8,200, $12,500. And all this time I called it love. Although in fact it was a system. A very polite, very stable system of milking. On the last page was the total. The final amount. $198,300. I rounded it up. "Almost 200, I said aloud. Almost $250,000, and all because of temporary difficulties. I wonder if they considered it a debt, or just an investment in what would soon be rightfully theirs. 200,000, and still not enough. My hand trembled as I dialed the number, not from fear, but from having put it off for too long. The phone flashed, a short beep, and the voice on the other end instantly took me back to the past. "Mrs. Grayson? To be honest, I didn't expect to hear from you again. Is everything okay?" "Not yet, but it will be. I need advice. Private, without my family involved." He was silent, and I could almost hear the tension in the air on the other end. "Everything you say will remain between us." My fingers found the pen, and without looking, I began to draw circles in the margins of the old plot plan. A cage may be luxurious, but it always has a way out. The main thing is to know where it is. I have a house that I bought with my own money. Stocks, savings, everything is in my name. But recently, my son and daughter-in-law. I hesitated. I got the feeling that they want to take control not only of my life, but also of my assets. "Do you suspect pressure?" "I suspect a plan. A cunning one with smiles and pies. Too polite to be sincere." He chuckled quietly. "Then my advice is simple. Check if anything has changed in the documents. I can send you a notary. Privately. No need to visit the office." I looked out the window. A titmouse was pecking at the glass with its beak. A small sound like patience. I hung up the phone and for the first time in a long time, felt not fear but clarity. Cold like the morning fog. If they think I'll give up, let them try. I woke up at 4 in the morning to a click. Someone had closed the gate. My heart pounded against my ribs like prison bars. There were no more footsteps. Silence. I stayed in the dark, hiding, listening, as if the walls could betray the traitor to me. In the afternoon I called an installer. "Do you want a hidden one or one with warning signs?" "Both. Let them know I can see. And let them think I can't see everything." A new rhythm appeared in the house, the clicking of sensors, thin wires on the windows, the restless buzzing of the control center. Marcia would have laughed. "What are you, turning it into a fortress?" And I wouldn't have answered, because it wasn't a fortress. It was a beehive, with a queen who didn't want to be stung. There was now a small screen in the kitchen, for black and white frames, the entrance, the backyard, the garage, the hallway. I started drinking my coffee in front of the monitor instead of by the window. They didn't come, but they were watching, I knew it. Through words, through glances, through pauses in conversation. Nathan started calling more often, asking if I was okay, if I needed a new water filter, if I was lonely. I smiled. Everything's fine, dear. I'm having fun here. Too much fun even. A notification popped up on my phone. Movement at the porch. I went to the monitor. There was a squirrel. Or maybe a shadow. Now I could see everyone who approached my door, even if they didn't know it themselves. I held the pen so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The paper trembled, even though there was no draft in the room. Only silence, thick as a heavy curtain covering the stage after the final act. "Ready to sign?" asked the lawyer without looking up. I nodded, almost imperceptibly. The words in the document were cold like surgical instruments. Clear, precise, deadly honest. First, the house would be transferred to a charitable foundation. My collection to the Museum of Women's History. The bank and pension fund would go to my niece Emma, the one who once brought me apple pie for no reason. Nathan and Marcia, $1 each. Exactly. Not by mistake but by design. $1 like the sign on the door. "You are not welcome here." $1 like an official. "I know who you are." One so they couldn't contest it. But they would never forgive it. "And it definitely won't seem harsh?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, as if someone else were speaking for me. "It will," replied the lawyer. "And that's the point." When I signed the last signature, my hands were shaking. But the trembling was from relief, not fear. "If you want me dead, you won't get my life." They entered without ringing the doorbell, as if it were their own home. I heard the lock click and immediately tensed up. I hadn't changed the code that day. That meant they still had access. "Mom, we just popped in," Nathan said. "You have missed calls from us." I folded the blanket on the armrest and smoothed out the corners. My phone was on silent. I wasn't expecting visitors. Marcia smiled as if she were still the mistress of the house. "We want to know how you are. After everything." She sat down on the edge of the sofa, too close. She smelled of lilacs, but there was something sharp in the scent, like vinegar that had gone bad. "I heard you visited Helen?" I asked. Nathan looked away. "Once. But Mom, we're not here about her." I caught a fleeting change in his expression, something between tension and apprehension. He knew, or guessed, about the will, about the call to the lawyer. I reached for the cup, but my hand betrayed me and trembled. My fingers wouldn't obey me, only my fingernails clung tightly to the porcelain. "We're worried. You think too much alone. It's bad for you at your age," Marcia added. I looked at her. At my age, it's too late to learn to trust. No arguments. No shouting. But the air was tense like a fishing line under the skin, thin, painful. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. I didn't recognize her at first glance. Pale, gaunt, wearing a gray sweater that clearly wasn't hers. But as soon as she said, "May I come in?" everything fell into place. Helen, the same one, foaming at the mouth, her body arched on the marble, and with eyes that still reflected confusion, and something else. I opened the door wider. "Of course. I'm sorry, I didn't expect." "They didn't expect me to come to my senses either," she said as she walked inside. We sat in the kitchen, where we had once laughed over sparkling wine, and now drank water with lemon, as if it could wash away the poison. Helen held the glass with both hands. Her fingers trembled, but her voice remained firm. I heard her say, "She shouldn't have taken that glass." "Who is she?" I asked, but the answer was obvious. When she described the crack in the glass, thin like a hair, an icy chill ran down my spine. "Are you sure?" Helen nodded. She turned it over as if she were checking it, and then she replaced it. I saw it through the noise, through the pain. "Why did you come to me?" "Because I heard your son say to her, 'It should have been more secure.'" Lightning. A muffled rumble. Or was it my heart? She remembered more than they would have liked. The number in the notebook had been erased by time and betrayal. But my finger trembled, and still pressed the button. A long beep. A second one. I was about to hang up when I heard, "Hello." The voice was hoarse as if after rain. But I would have recognized it even through a thunderstorm. "Alex?" It's me. Pause. For years, Martha. What happened? I never called him just like that. And he knew it. I stood by the window, pressing the receiver to my ear as if it were my last chance. I need help. Serious help. Is he back? Or is this about those who are closer? He always sensed what was hidden between the lines. I told him everything, my voice steady, almost emotionless, but my knees buckling treacherously, like a schoolgirl at confession. Alex remained silent. Then he said briefly, "Are you sure it was intentional?" Helen confirmed it. "And I know my sister-in-law too well. She's not capable of an accident. I need the guest list. And access to the cameras. It's already been compiled. Then let's get started." When the connection was lost, I noticed that my fingers had left prints on the glass, like a signature under a confession. Sometimes to protect yourself you have to open up, but only to someone who once saved you from yourself. I knew who I could trust with the truth. "You're doing everything right, Mom, just let go." The word mom stuck to her lips like artificial honey, sticky, foreign. I nodded, slowly, emphatically, as if I were giving up, as if I no longer had the strength to defend myself. But something cracked inside me, not from pain, from calculation. "We've prepared the documents," he said, handing me a folder. "Just sign them." His voice trembled, not from excitement but from impatience. I ran my finger over the cover. The paper was thick, smelling of the printing press in haste. Signing meant acknowledging their victory, and I had already chosen my side. My signature was uncertain. The handwriting was as if it weren't mine. They exchanged glances and she smiled restrainedly. "We knew you would make the right decision." Her fingers rested on my shoulder. Cold, like a midwife who delivers not life, but a sentence. But in the safe, between the real will and the correspondence with the lawyer, there was a second folder with an exact copy of the document. Only it had a real signature. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, getting up. "I have some with jasmine. It's calming." And while they nodded gratefully, I already knew how it would all turn out. They didn't understand that they were playing by my rules. The siren cut through the morning like a razor through silence. Outside the window, a flash of blue, a burst of uniform strictness. I didn't move. My hands were clasped as if in prayer, but inside, everything vibrated with anticipation. It wasn't fear. It was the final chord. "Mrs. Livingston?" A steady masculine voice at the door. "We have the results of the examination." Examination. A word that smacks of truth and the smell of alcohol. They entered without knocking, as befits those who come not to ask, but to demand. I held out my hand, gesturing for them to come into the living room. "Please, would you like to sit down?" He shook his head. "No, it will only take a couple of minutes." One of them placed an envelope on the table, thin but heavy, like a bullet. There were traces of diazepam on the paper, traces in the glass, in Helen's blood, on her son's fingerprints. She appeared in the doorway, weightless, with a cane and a scarlet wine-colored scarf. "I remember everything," Helen said. "Everything except the taste of the water. It was bitter." They exchanged glances. He turned pale. She looked away. "Are you sure you don't want to say anything?" asked the detective. Her son opened his mouth but made no sound. I raised my glass of tea and said quietly, "A real toast to the truth." He didn't resist. He just sat on the edge of the bed, as if he had been waiting for them since morning. The shirt, the one I gave him for his anniversary, looked ridiculous against the handcuffs. I stood in the doorway and clenched my fingers until they went numb. My head was empty, my body was ringing. "Are you sure you want to be here?" the officer asked. "This is my home," I replied, "and nothing else." He didn't even look at me. Not a single attempt to explain. Just a weary sigh as they led him through the hall. "Mom!" he muttered, as if for form's sake. The word fell between us like a stone in water. No splash, no ripples. I bit my lip and tasted blood. Disappointment is when it doesn't hurt anymore. It's not even hurtful. Just a stranger in your chair with your facial features. I remembered how he used to hide chocolate behind his back. How he would scratch his forehead when he lied. How he stopped doing that. When exactly? "Did you know?" Helen whispered to me. I nodded. Then you're stronger than you seem. The screen flashed in the car. Blue lights reflected in the window like blots on old paper. I didn't cry. Crying is about loss. And I just realized that I had lost my son before I realized it. If you could be anyone, who would you be? Emma sat on the floor in her bunny pajamas, intently molding a little man out of plasticine. I sat down next to her, feeling the tension in my back muscles, as if even my spine was tired of being the backbone. I don't know, I said, watching her little fingers straighten the tiny legs. What about you? An astronaut? Or a grandmother? A real one? With jam? I laughed and suddenly cried. Not from pain but from being overwhelmed. But you're already a grandmother, Emma said in surprise and handed me the doll. She'll live in your house. Did you decide that yourself? She's safe here. Her words pierced me more deeply than the interrogation, the cameras and the lawyers. I was afraid that the house would be engulfed in silence, but it turned out that a child's voice could be heard in it. Emma didn't ask where her father was, and that silence was wiser than adult truth. Grandma, you know I love you, right? Of course. Even if you become very old someday? Especially then, I said, and my fingers stopped trembling for the first time in a long time. She did not carry the burden of the name, but she carried its light. She is my true heir. I didn't think I would ever want to drink tea alone, but this Tuesday Helen came with a pie. Not with questions, not with pity, but with a cherry pie and printed pages. Look, I edited the first chapter. She handed me the sheets. You really should finish this book. I ran my fingers over the margins of the text. The words blurred, but not because of a mistake, because they were true. Mine naked and uneven. We sat by the fireplace like two witches who had survived being burned. Do you think anyone will want to read this? I asked. They should, because silence no longer heals. She suggested creating a foundation, in memory of the women who didn't have time to tell their stories. I hesitated, but looking at her hands clasped around the cup, I realized she wasn't holding tea, but my fragility. Let's call it the voices that remained, said Helen. Or the ones who returned, I added, smiling sincerely for the first time. Sometimes the lies appear in the most unexpected places. Paper smells like power when it has your terms on it. I held the final agreement in my hands, my fingers trembling not from fear but from responsibility. So many months and it all came down to these lines. The lawyer with manicured hands pointed to where I needed to sign. The black pen touched the paper like a dagger touching skin. No blood, but with consequences. Everything has been checked. The transfers are secure, the trusts are activated, you are the sole beneficiary, he said and looked me in the eyes. I nodded, not taking my eyes off my surname. Now it was no longer someone else's capital. Now it was my fortress. Emma stood in the corner, drawing a castle with heart-shaped windows on her tablet. Is this our house? She asked. Exactly, I replied. My back straightened as if my spine were made of steel. I sent copies to 4 jurisdictions. For reliability. Are you sure you don't want to change the address to offshore? Asked the assistant. Let everything be in my real name. I'm not hiding anything anymore. Now my signature is the strongest lock. They wanted to break me quietly, between a family dinner and a glass of wine. No scandals, no fuss. Just erase the boundaries, cross out my I, and rewrite history with someone else's ink. But with age comes not weakness. With age comes steel hidden under cashmere. My joints creak more often than before, but now every step is a statement. I didn't burn out, I reforged myself. Grandma, were you really in the newspaper? Emma peered into the box where the clippings were kept. Not just one, I smiled. But that's not the point. The main thing is not whose truth is louder, but whose silence is stronger. I didn't get louder. I got more precise. I'm not young, but I don't need youth to be dangerous. I was taught to be convenient. I chose to be myself. What would you do if it all happened again? Helen asked, making tea. I looked at her, then at Emma, who was drawing a castle from her imagination. The same thing, only sooner. What about you? What would you do in my place? Subscribe if you want to hear another story that won't be told on TV.